Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 8th round of the 1000 GM 6-day Summer Invitational Tournament being held in New York City. Now, Levy has been doing really well in this event. He's on 6 points out of 7, having won 5 games with 2 draws. Now, Levy has faced the strongest players in the tournament in the final 2 games today. He is playing against the bottom ranked seeds who are both below 2100. So Levy having a more than 250 point advantage, we expect good things from him. So in the 8th round, Levy is the white piece against Alexander Kretchatov, and let's jump right into the action. So the game starts with the move c4 from Levy, and now we get the move g6. We have d4 being played, bishop g7, and now the move knight c3. Now here, Kretchatov plays the move d6. You're probably very disappointed because, of course, for anybody who's a vegan out there, they're definitely not a fan of this move c5. This is what we call the classic beef eater defense. I've actually played it a lot in games online many times. It's probably a little bit unsound after d5, bishop c3 takes f5 and h4, but nonetheless, Levy's opponent eschews this variation in honor of playing d6 and trying to go back towards a King's Indian defense. So after d6, we get the move e4, and now we have this move knight d7. Levy plays bishop e3, and now we get the move e5. After e5, Levy plays knight ge2, and now we get this move knight e7. Now, I myself have played this setup many times. Normally when black plays these setups, these sort of hyper modern ideas with d6 and g6, and you move the knights early, you're simply trying to get a game and you're hoping to outskill your opponent. Now, one of the problems with these setups are that if white knows what he's doing, white can actually get a pretty big advantage early on in the game. And so when you do this, normally it's a good opening to play against lower rated players below your rating to try and get them out of book and simply outplay them. Unfortunately for Kretchatov, he's playing against Levy, who is close to 2350. I guess he's higher than that with his wins, and such an idea could backfire. So after knight e7, we get this move h4, and this is a very, very good move from Levy. Now, I don't think that Levy probably studied this before the game. Honestly, I don't know what his opponent's repertoire is, but one of the great things for Levy is that because he does play a lot of blitz games on the internet, he probably has run into many players who've tried to play these hyper modern setups because they're trying to pay homage to that famous streamer Hikaru. So after h4, we get this move f5 being played, and now Levy plays move f3. Now you're probably also wondering what's the point of h4. The big point behind h4 is that white wants to castle the king to the queen side, but white wants to also force black to do something on the king side very quickly. So if black plays h6, in many cases you end up with a situation where after queen to d2 is played, there's a lot of pressure on this pawn in h6, preventing black from castling, or even situations with h5 g5 and something like knight g3 or a move like g4 potentially, trying to stop black from ever being able to play f5. So in this game, Kretchatov decides to play the move f5, and now we have this move f3 being played by Levy, and we get this move castles. Here, Levy correctly plays the move h5. Now, this is a move that is probably the best move. It's a move that I was not a huge fan of during the game, because when you do play this move h5, it leads to a very concrete and fixed pawn structure. So you get f4, bishop f2, g5, and now Levy correctly plays the move h6. Now, one of the reasons I didn't love this approach from Levy is because when you go h6, if you aren't very, very precise, and let's just say pieces come off, in an endgame, this pawn will be a very quick target and a weakness which black can go after. Nonetheless, as you'll notice, all the pieces are on the board in this position, and now Levy plays the move queen b3. Now, I did not like this move when I was covering it during my live stream on Kick. I thought that queen d2 followed by castles was a little bit more natural in this position, but Levy decides to go for queen b3. Now, the point behind queen b3 is white still wants to castle the king out of the center of the board, but white also wants to try and potentially play for something like c5 here, something like c5, king h8 castles, and there's a lot of pressure here on the open files in the middle of the board. So after queen b3, Kretchatov plays the move c5 here, and now we get the move pawn takes pawn. Keep in mind, c5 is actually the best move, but after takes, we get this move d takes c5 being played. Now, Kretchatov probably should have taken with the knight here, and after white goes queen c2, knight c6, and knight to d5, black can now play this move g4. Let's just say white castles. And after a move like b6 here, supporting the knight on c5, white is a little bit better here, but white cannot ever go for g3, trying to rip open the g file because of g takes f3, which wins the pawn. So white loses the ability to play for g3 here, and if white ever takes, now the pawn on e4 is a little bit loose, the black bishop becomes active, and in fact the black king on the g file is very, very safe, unlike in the game, as we'll see a little bit later on. So Cruncher Top instead takes with the pawn. We get castles. Now we have knight c6. Levy plays knight d5, and now we get this move knight d4, and here Levy plays the move queen to a3. After b6 is played, Levy plays the move g3, and this is a very, very good decision. One of the great things about this position, or the general structure for Levy, is the pawns are very, very fixed here on c4, c5, e4, e5, f4, and f3, but White can try to open up the king side. White obviously is never going to play b4 on the queen side because you've castled the king. You don't really want to be pushing the pawns in front of the king. So you don't have b4. What other ideas do you really have? And g3 is a very thematic move. Also because there is the pawn on h6 as well. So if the g file ever opens up, say you got bishop b7, let's just say takes, rook g1. Down the road, maybe you can plant a rook or a queen on the g7 square. So after g3, we get the move bishop b7, Levy takes, we get bishop takes knight, and now Levy decides to play the move knight takes d4. Now, this is a decision that I was not a big fan of, if I'm being honest. I felt that here Levy probably should have just taken the bishop on d5 right away, and after g takes f4 in this position, if White keeps the knights on the board, say you play king b1 followed by queen to d3 and knight c1, for example, Black's bishop on f6 is very, very passive. There's a pawn in the way, and there simply is no scope towards the white king. So instead, Levy decides to play knight takes knight, and now we get this move e takes d4 being played, and we get the move c d5. Now, this was a very committal decision from Levy, and it's not one that I actually liked during the game. Now, while c takes d5 is a very reasonable move, and in fact, I think that, well, it's not the best computer move, at least on my engine, but it's still decent, is that after e takes d5 and g takes f4, for example, and a move like queen to d3, there are two open files here, the e file and the g file here, with both rooks being able to come to these files. White also has bishop to h3 as well, and White simply has no risk here of being attacked at any point in the game. So instead, we get c takes d5, g takes f4 is played, Levy goes rook to h5, and this is a move that is completely fine, but here we get this move knight e5. Now, one of the reasons I don't like this position so much for White, or one of the reasons I would have preferred e5, is that here Black has a connect 4 in the center of the board, pawns from a7 to d4 in this position, and on top of having the connect 4, Black can try to put on knight on e5, stop White from pushing these pawns, and pressure the pawn on f3. So here we get the move knight e5. Now, at this point, you'll probably notice the bar is really far down. It's not actually a great position for White. White is still better, but Black has very concrete plans of trying to blockade these pawns, get the knight here, and then trying to attack on the queen side. So after knight to e5 is played, Levy plays king b1, and now we get this move king h8 being played. Now, one of the things about this position is the computer actually wants Black to play a6 or a5 immediately to try and stop White from being able to blockade these light squares. So after king to h8, Levy plays the move rook f5, we get the move knight to g6, and now we have this move queen a6 being played. Now, this move queen to a6, you're probably thinking, well, it's not a big deal. Why am I going to get all excited about this move? This move is easily the best move that Levy has played in the entire tournament so far. And the reason I say that is because while the computer wants a move like bishop a6 potentially as being slightly better, I don't think bishop a6 makes a lot of sense from a human perspective, because generally when you look at this position, where do the B's belong? You want this bishop on h3 to go to e6 or the f5 square down the road. Putting the bishop on a6, while it looks nice, it doesn't really do a whole lot, and the bishop is off sides. So when Levy plays queen a6, stopping Black from playing a6 or a5, now at this point it felt like Levy was doing very well. So we get the move queen to e7, Levy plays bishop to h3, and now we have this move bishop h4 being played, and this is actually a fairly serious mistake in the position. At this point in the game, Levy has a small advantage here. He has the connected pawns to the center. Black also has his chain of 4 as well. If Black were to play a move like rook a d8 here, let's just say White goes rook g1, not rook h1, sorry. If White were to play a move like rook to g1, for example, after rook to g8 is played, Black intends to go knight e5 and play for d3 and c4 here. And the game is very much alive at this point. I think the computer says the best move is queen f1. Again, is this a human move? No, I don't think queen f1 would ever be played. And without queen f1, actually, I think that Black is very close to taking over the initiative in this game and getting an advantage. So in this position, Levy's opponent plays bishop h4, and millions of people out there on the internet breathe a heavy sigh of relief, as this is simply a bad move. Now, the reason this is a bad move is for a couple of reasons. First of all, when you look at the position, the only white piece that is not very good here is the dark square b on f2. It has very little scope. The connect 4 blunts any effectiveness on this diagonal. Bishop on f6 covers h4. So the b on f2 is very, very passive here. And because the b is passive, you don't really want to try to trade it off. So in this position, We get bishop h4, and now Levy plays the move queen 2. Now keep in mind, the computer here I think says that Levy was supposed to trade first, trade, and then go queen to e2, and it's close to winning. But again, it's hard to fault Levy. It's hard to fault any human here because you simply can't play this at a 3500 level. So after bishop h4, Levy instead plays the move queen to e2, and now we get the move bishop f6 back. And this is a move that I thought was a great decision by Levy's opponent, because in this position, again, if black were to trade here, the big issue is that Levy's can really tunnel on one plan, which is to play rook g1, rook g5. Let's just sample it out, something like this. Rook g5, let's just say rook d8, bishop f5, and now you have the double stack. You're pressuring the knight, rook is infiltrating. You can even do the triple stack, and there's only one plan for white to tunnel on. So only one plan in position. There's no chance for Levy to make a mistake here, and it should be a pretty easy cruise to victory. So after queen e2, Levy's opponent goes bishop f6, trying to keep the good bishop versus the bad bishop, and now we have the move rook h5, and here Khrushchev blunders with the move bishop e5. Now while white always has an advantage, it was imperative around this point in the game for black to try and create some counterplays. Something like knight e5, play for d3 and c4, maybe something like b5, sacking a pawn to open up the file, but black has to go for counterplay because white is angling everything over towards the king side here, and if you don't get any counterplay on the queen side, eventually white will crash through on the king side. So Khrushchev plays bishop e5, and this is a fairly serious mistake because now the knight can never jump to the square again in the game, and that means that any ideas with c4 and d3 simply are no longer a threat because you need the knight here to support the two critical squares. So it's the case of putting the bishop on the square where the knight belongs. So after bishop to e5, we get the move bishop e6 from Levy. Now we have the move rook to f6, and here bishop f5 is played. Again, not the only move, but good enough. Probably what Levy was worried about is if he played a move like rook g1 right away, that black would sack the rook, and after takes with ideas like c4 and d3, there still is some life in the position, some counterplay potentially exists for black. So Levy goes bishop f5, and now we get this move queen d6. Levy goes rook g1, bringing everything over to the king side, and now he's also intending to potentially play the move bishop h4 as well to get rid of the bad beat. Here Khrushchev plays move a6, and this is really the last moment where it felt like Levy's opponent could have created some complications with this move b5, sacking a pawn. Now again, it would have been very interesting to see what would have happened after this move, because when you look at the time situation, Levy was down 20 minutes on the clock, and this is a move that creates a very concrete threat. If you play rook g5 and black at c4 and d3, suddenly the scope is opening up for the b. Let's just say rook g2 and d3. Scope is open for the b. You have a new connect 3 from b5 to d3, and the game starts to spin quite out of control. So it would have been really interesting if b5 were played. And one thing that I oftentimes try to say in my videos at the more advanced level is that you always have to be looking for counterplay. When you look at this position, it's very, very clear that white has 3 connected pawns in the center of the board. He has a great light square b. The bishop is weak on e5. There's pressure on the g file. Just looking at this position optically, it's very clear that if white can get the correct setup of the pieces, you will not be able to stop the breakthrough on the king side. And when that is the case, you really have to look for desperation. You really have to try to find counterplay, a way to open up the board. So if b5 were played, I think the computer said queen takes b5, rook b8, and queen a4 is best. But after d3, b3, and queen a6, suddenly this is getting very, very messy on the a and the b files, and it's really unclear what exactly is going on. Computer says the best move for white here is to play bishop d7. This is simply a move that I'm not sure. I mean, I guess maybe you find it with time, but finding this whole sequence is really, really unclear, very, very murky. And this is the last moment where if b5 had been played, there would have been chances for the show to go on. Instead, we get the move a6. Levy plays bishop h4. We have the move rook f8. Black probably should have traded the knight for the bishop here, but after takes, let's just say rook h6, for example, white can trade the rooks here and go queen g2 with the idea of rook to h1, winning the h7 pawn. And after queen g7, white goes queen f1, queen f7, rook to h1, and now white is crashing through on the h file and will win the game. So we get rook f8, Levy goes queen g2, logical move, lining up the queen and the rook on the file. Here we get the move rook g8, Levy plays bishop to e6, and now we have this move rook gf8 being played, and Levy goes rook to g5. Now, computer says that rook to f5 is a little bit better in terms of a way of trying to crash on the king side, but honestly, rook g5 is the move that I think I would play, looking to sack the rook for the knight, or go bishop f5 and just remove the knight on g6 from the game altogether. So we get rook g5, and now rook f6 is played here. This is the final moment where black could have played the move c4, desperately trying to open up the queen side, maybe go c3 and queen b4, trying to do something to create counterplay. Last moment here. Computer says there are many ways for white to win, but the one thing that's important here is that Levy still would have had to find one or two more moves, because the obvious looking move, rook takes g6, sacking the rook. After takes in this position, black can play c3 here. There's no actual mate on g8 or g7 here, and suddenly black is trying to go for a lolly mate on the queen side. Instead, we get rook to f6, and now Levy goes bishop f5. We get to move rook g8, rook g4 played, bishop targeting the rook. Can't capture the bishop because then you lose the rook on g8. At this point, the game is effectively over. So we get d3 being played. Levy takes the rook. Bishop takes f6, and now we have bishop takes f6 being played. Levy goes bishop takes knight, pawn takes, rook takes, and after rook takes, queen takes g6. I believe Levy's opponent played the move queen f8 before resigning, but there are many different ways for white to win here, even if black doesn't. Probably simplest is to go h7, threatening mate on g8, bishop g7, and now I can take the bishop, and after takes, and d6. The wide people is rule of the day. White will get a queen here and win the game. And if d2, king c2, you stop the d pawn, and that's all she wrote. So in this position, Levy's opponent resigns after playing the move queen f8. Levy gets a big win, moves to 7 points out of 8. Now, what I would say about this game is a very, very clean game for Levy. There isn't really a whole lot that I can critique either player on, unlike other games, because this game was decided on the board. There were no big moments where players mismanaged their time. They got too low on time in a critical moment. This was a game where the players simply tried to play their best moves, and there was nothing else going on. So you're probably wondering, like, why am I not being so critical? That is the reason, because this was simply a good game that was decided on the board. None of the psychological stuff or time mismanagement played a huge role. So Levy gets a win. Really not a whole lot that I could say in terms of things he could have done better. His opponent definitely could have done things better, as I said earlier. Generally, when one side is trying to attack very hard on a certain side of the board, if you look at the position and it becomes clear that your opponent will break through eventually, you have to look for some counterplay on the opposite side of the board, in the center, sacking pawns, whatever it is. You have to look for active play, because in this game, from a very early moment, I would say right around here, it became clear that you could not stop white from breaking through on the king side. So you have to look for the counterplay. You have to look for the desperation. You have to try to find counterplay at all costs when your opponent is trying to barrel down and attack you on one side of the board. So at any rate, Levy gets a big win, moves to 7 out of 8 in the final game. I believe he will. The black piece is playing against someone even lower rated at 2065, so he probably should win this game. If he does win the final game, he'll wrap it up and gain about 20 points, which is a very, very good performance for Levy overall. So great stuff from Levy. He gets the win, moves to 7 out of 8, and that's going to be it for right now. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the 8th round of the 1000 GM 6-day summer invitational being held in New York City. If you are not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with a final recap after round number 9 later this afternoon. I'll see you guys soon. Have a good one. Bye.